Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here. Wow, I'm very honoured and privileged to introduce these two amazing people and to be asked to do so for a number of reasons. I know Juliet personally and professionally. It's the first time I'm meeting Siddarth. But also this conversation really resonates with me at a very personal level. So I thought it'd be great to just share a bit of context about why these conversations are so important. So I'm a British Sri Lankan and I'm a hotelier. And I straddle east and west on a daily basis because of my job. And it's vitally important for me to understand and see how these conversations about travel can be shared across the world, because from a business perspective, it really affects me personally. So in 2018, I built a hotel in Sri Lanka. It was 10 years after the end of a 30-year civil war in Sri Lanka. The country was just rebuilding itself, and we were flying. Sri Lanka was a place to go. Everyone wanted to go there. It was absolutely fantastic. 2 years later, lockdown. And like everyone else, I just assumed we'll be out of it in 2 months. I better talk about something. No one can travel to Sri Lanka, so I'm going to start blogging. I'm going to start talking about all the things that I find interesting. People, culture, human connection, architecture. So I was blogging, wondering if anyone out there was listening. And then I tuned into a webinar and a podcast, and I heard this wonderful lady called Juliet Kinsman being interviewed. And she was talking about the power of storytelling. And she started to talk about how storytellers can affect travel, how people are as important as the planet in these sustainability conversations. And I found my head nodding vigorously, thinking, oh my God, here's someone of influence who's saying the same things. So like any self-respecting businesswoman, I stalked her. And I contacted her and I said, I'd love you to do some consulting for me. And she did an amazing job, and we worked together for a while. And Juliet helped me sift through all my stories and my marketing and helped me think about how I was going to position myself so that when we finally got back out there, people would listen to what I was saying. So, of course, we came out of COVID and travel was back. Sri Lanka then went through its own series of further problems. Great fun that was. And we had a hard time. And with the political crisis and everything else and all the other nonsense that was happening then, I found myself reading things in the press which actually were not at all representative of what was happening on the ground, which was really sad. And that was more of an impact on Sri Lanka than COVID was. It decimated us. Anyway, we're back in 2024, things are back on the map, and we're flying again. And so I often wonder about the power of storytelling, and I want to just share a couple of things with you. Just last week, there was an influencer with over 600,000 followers who was on Instagram. And I noticed that he was talking about Sri Lanka, so I unmuted him. And he said, guys, welcome to Sri Lanka. It's the new Bali.
Oh my God.
Oh my God. Look, here you can get avocado on toast, and right here on the beach is a cactus. Did you see that? Oh my word. Sri Lanka's not renowned for its cacti, right? Does anyone really want to hear that? On the other hand, I understand the power of influential marketing. Last year we were in Condé Nast, in the best places to visit in Asia, and I was really thankful for the journalist who actually took some time to talk to us and was really interested in what we were doing. That resonated. She put us in the list, very specifically mentioning why we were in the list, and my bookings went through the roof. So here I am as a Sri Lankan. As a Sri Lankan person, I want you to come to Sri Lanka for the country, not because it's Bali, but for Sri Lanka. And as a hotelier and as an entrepreneur, I need to keep my business going, and I'm happy to pay for PR, but I want it to be targeting the right audience. So this is why this conversation is so important. Juliet and Sid, thank you so much for sharing your words of wisdom about how, we're going to be sharing your words of wisdom, about how we can, as an industry, and there's so much power in this room, as an industry, how can we give a platform and a voice and support to influential people who will bring the right people to the destinations and forget about the avocado on toast. So without further ado, I would like to just read out about these wonderful people. So Siddarth Shrikanth is an investor in environmental solutions and the author of The Case for Nature, which explores economic models around the world to protect and restore nature. As we all know, Juliet is a very accomplished author, journalist, and podcaster. And apart from being the first sustainability editor for Condé Nast and founding editor for Mr. and Mrs. Smith, she has her own travel consultancy, Boutico. It's the one I use. And she loves raising awareness about how important it is that we do travel and share better stories along the way.
Thank you,
So
Dee.
over to you. Thank you.
Genuinely, thank you. I feel starting already emotional. Thanks.
Thank you.
So I'm going to give you the icebreaker, if that's okay. I'd like you all to think about a really unmemorable moment from your travels that you'll always remember. And I'll give you an example of mine. I was on a train traveling from Milan up to the Dolomites. It was a Swiss train, funnily enough. So I'm on a train buying the coffee, but it's Swiss. Remember when we were in the EU? Anyway. And the weirdest, I was sitting down and I suddenly realized everyone around me was talking German. And I thought, wow, I have lived in Europe for so many years. I never knew that people in the north of Italy speak German. Did you know that? Some of you will. Yeah. So anyway, I went to Frestis. So that was my moment where I realized, you think you know the world, but till you get out there, would you please turn to someone you don't know and share with them a little moment that was seemingly banal. I had someone pronounce that banal the other day. It's quite funny. So banal, that you always cherish. And can I also say, there are some incredible people in this room tonight. I really want you to get to know each other. I don't want to embarrass you all, but look, don't come to me for travel recommendations. Amongst here, there are some of the greatest people when it comes to creating incredible trips. So I want you to get to know each other.
Conversations, but I must break them up. I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry. Wow, that actually worked, Juliet. Incredible. Okay, amazing. So I am not a travel, I love travel. I travel a huge amount. I'm not a travel industry person.
Can I embarrass you and say something that someone said at his 30th birthday the other day? It could be my son. Anyway, they said, Sid, saving the world one business class flight at a time.
Not entirely accurate, but the point is taken. I genuinely love travel. I have done a huge amount of it. I've lived in lots and lots of places in my life. So I have a huge amount to learn from everyone in this room, including Juliet. And so what I've done over the years is focus on nature and climate and sustainability. And so my whole career has been in that space. I studied conservation biology. I've lived in all these places and worked on projects on the ground, worked with large companies, worked with governments, been a journalist. But really, the focus of this conversation is Juliet. And so what I'm going to do is embarrass Juliet and ask her a few questions. But I'm going to let you in a little secret. So all of you are allowed to do the same in this conversation. So if you have a question, maybe that's not allowed. Master's over there. But I would love for you to ask questions throughout this conversation. If there's a burning question or something really important that comes up, put your hand up. I'll take note of it. I want this to feel like a real conversation because those are the best ones. I have a few to get us kicked off, if you don't mind. I'm going to start with this amazing book, which I've had on my coffee table for a month now. And every time I dive in, I see something absolutely incredible. And there's actually, a whole host of different experiences in here. But Julia, what I want to start with is just your favorite memories from some of these places. I know many of these places you've been to personally, you've researched, you know the people who run them. What I love, and actually if you do pick up the book, there's a color code in the beginning. I'm a very simple mind, and so color code is great. The color code gives you, categories of things that you might want to do. So relaxation, nature, journeys, city life, food and drink, the kind of building blocks of the travel experience. And so I'm going to start with journeys and the journeys you've been on.
Great. Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you to Rizzoli Universe, the publisher. They came to me with this idea. It's an existing series, probably 3 years ago, and it was so much work. And I really can't take credit. There were quite a few of us who co-authored it. But I got my name on the spine. But Shaf Medji, where are you? He is one of the authors. He is one of the best writers. He's a real author. He's a real author.
You're a real author.
It's a lot of work doing these, and actually, I love the categories that they do, the themes. So you've asked me journeys, okay. I would say that I'm not sure I categorize it as journeys, and here I actually categorize it as food and drink, but who cares? You have to. It's Slovenia. So I don't know who's been to Slovenia, but one of the greatest things about Slovenia, apart from being a bona fide sustainable destination for lots of reasons, they've really cared about what's green. I met with actually the head of the tourist board there in 2002 for lunch. I was covering it for Time Out magazine. I know, and I suddenly became the UK Slovenia expert after 2 days in Ljubljana, which was how journalism used to be.
You might still be.
And I went back there, one of the trips I did after the pandemic, and I took the train there and back, and it can be done, and it's really easy, and it's a really wonderful thing to do. But when I was there, I hired an electric car, which you can't do in all destinations, and I did one of the best things I've ever done. I went on a car train. So if anyone's old enough to remember those really clunky roller skates that you used to put onto your trainers, right? It's kind of like that, but a train. So you drive onto it. It is so weird. Instead of going right round the mountains, you just go through them. So that was, as a journey and a memory, Slovenia. I will also say the food and drink, which is, I think it does fall under, is so exceptional. I think people don't, again, we have these preconceptions of former Yugoslavian or communist countries. It is the best food and wine in the world. Villa Planinka, that I like to think Boris and his wife Carrie, went on their honeymoon there because I made a big deal out of this hotel, Villa Planinka. And what I loved was they'd just been visited by Michelin, and they were one of the first hotels ever to get a Michelin, I guess, green star without having any French wines. It was all Slovenian wines because, there's a lot of those restrictions in the world with all these, accreditations, neocolonialism, etc. But Slovenia, great. And traveling back, I traveled through, I guess, 4 countries on the way home. My geography is actually terrible. I'm really sorry. My daughter's got her geography A-level soon. I was really bad at geography. But it's great coming back on the train. You go through. You hear, again, I remember people, how they respond to you. One person, I was sat in her seat. Weirdly, we had the same ticket on our number on our ticket. And the way an Austrian person responds to that and a German person, there are nuances, right? Love it.
I love the serendipity of those moments is incredible because I just got back from South Africa and Mozambique, where I was there for a few weeks, and I was sat minding my own business on a train, and this person comes up to me, and turns out he's been involved in rhino conservation, which I love, and I had no idea why he chose to approach me. Maybe I looked like a rhino fan or something, but he did, and we had the most amazing conversation. And I think those things you wouldn't get unless you were there at the right time. And I just love. I can think of lots of journeys that have made me think.
I was sat opposite a guy on a train to Harrogate last year. One of the best conversations I had in the year, apart from when we met in Bali, obviously. Yeah. He's called Kevin Lax Kelly. If you look him up, he's the head of the UK's head of wildlife crime. Okay, I sat opposite this guy on a train, started talking, and he told me that one of the biggest crimes in the world, sorry, buzzkill coming up. I can't remember.
The next theme is nature, so keep going.
So, I don't know if you know this, but one of the worst crimes in the world, not just nature, wildlife crimes, is people paying to watch monkeys being tortured. Did you know that? I know, it's mind-blowing. And so, so we had this. I want to get Kevin here talking, because people just don't know this stuff. It's sort of entry level. They just pay $5, $10 to watch. Honestly, incredible. So always talk to people on trains. You learn a lot. My hero.
But I'm going to ask about nature, Juliet. So the reflection before I ask you the question was, I say this very humbly, I know not that much about the travel industry. What I do know is that, and in the book, The Case for Nature, what I tried to do was, I wrote a chapter on ecotourism, which is an idea that's been around for quite a while. We'll talk about how that's changed, but it's been around for a while. It's also true that in some places, tourism is the only industry, or the main industry, and the only choice that people might have that doesn't involve destroying the natural ecosystem they live in, or all of the other stuff that comes with it, but that doesn't come without cost, and those benefits are not shared equally. We'll get into all of that, but I've been thinking about the potential for tourism to actually help protect and restore nature, not just do less bad for nature. And so in that frame, I'd love to reflect on places that do that in your mind.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the first question whenever you say to someone, I've even had it in audiences here, you say, oh, I work in sustainable travel, and they say, oh, so you're basically just about anti-flying. That's the way, and I saw Paul Fansdale, founder of the Conduit's LinkedIn post this week, was like, oh, a lot of us feel guilty about flying. That's where everyone goes to. And so when you think about how many destinations are entirely reliant on funding their nature conservation through luxury travel, I mean, it's really phenomenal. And if you think of, honestly, please do buy and read Sid's book, The Case for Nature. It really helps you understand the importance of investing in businesses, reserves, communities that are restoring nature. And as we know, it's one of the, I'm assuming, it's a very aware, I feel like there's not much I can say that you don't already know in this room, but investing in nature is one of the most powerful tools, more than ever. I don't need to already go into the American politics situation and how much will be dismantled, but we won't go there yet. Sid works with, imagine if Al Gore was voted in. Once upon a time, he works with Al Gore. But in terms of travel, taking money to places to invest in actual nature conservation. And biodiversity, we were all busily trying to raise awareness around the importance of biodiversity last year, as a climate solution. But I almost give up. We need to rebrand or just abandon biodiversity, I'm sorry to say, a bit, and just call it nature, because that's what's so important. So one of my moments where I really realized the power of particularly luxury travel was in 2019, end of 2018, at the Datai Langkawi in Malaysia. And what's interesting about that property and that island itself, I don't know if you know this, but I think arguably it was the very first bit of land in the world ever, as the seas, the sea levels dropped, and the first bit of land that came out was Langkawi, so their rainforest is the most ancient. So I think they feel that heightened responsibility. Well, it's just so poignant, and they have that incredible biodiversity. And I was there touring their permaculture garden, which was a new sort of, back then was a bit of a, for some hotels was kind of a gimmick, like what's permaculture, reducing waste, being circular, all the stuff that now are terms in the mainstream, thank goodness. But it was really, really realizing the power of tourism to take you out of your life, put you in nature, make you care about nature up close. And that's when people then start talking to me, oh, we shouldn't fly. I'm like, yeah, it's so important that we just make our carbon emissions count when we fly. I call it ROE, return on emissions. But we have got to fund this. And then there's the whole conversation around urbanification, people leaving rural areas, moving to cities, communities breaking up. Lots of borgos in Italy, if they didn't have tourism, those communities would disappear, and so would kind of the family networks, and so would the agriculture. And so anyway, but Sid, you know more about that. Come on, this whole... I'm happy to... You tell everyone, you explain.
I don't know very much, but what I tried to do was explore all the different sides of this, because there are lots of different ways to look at the same set of facts. And so I think we can agree on a shared set of facts. Nature is in decline. There are lots of places where you have choices on how you fund protecting and restoring the planet. It could be policy, it could be businesses, it could be kind of commercial investment. There are lots of places where those choices don't exist, right? And so we have to create a new set of choices or accept destruction, which we don't want to accept. And when we think through where those places are, there's quite a lot of those places that happen to be really far away from the centers of global power and wealth. And so you must travel to get there. You usually fly to get there, right? Those are all facts. It's also true that travel, on a global basis, not that many people travel. I don't know what the exact stat is, but it's like 20% of people on planet Earth have ever flown.
80% of people never, ever leave their country in the world.
So most people don't do this, right? So it's Are
you being a flight carbon miles
Let me think through it with you, because I think it's really hard to, there is no easy answer here. But if you think about it, most people do not fly. Most people do not travel very far. And so the fact that you even do it puts you in the top 10 or 20% of the world. There's another fact. There's a huge amount of inequality in the world. luxury travel is accessible to a very small number of people. Like, these are all just true things. Like, we can agree on that. So the question for me, coming at it from a very specific angle, with humility around the things I don't understand, is, given all these things, can we help protect and restore nature in specific places using a mechanism like tourism?
So, how many of you genuinely know that the UK is the most nature-depleted country in the world? Okay, so this is a very aware, but I mean, look, fact. The UK is the most nature-depleted country in the world. I'll tell you who I learned that through and how you can all familiarize yourself with that. It was Isabella Tree. So you can read Wilding. I had the privilege of interviewing her at Knepp Estate for my Evening Standard podcast, RIP.
I interviewed her for the book. There you go.
Did you? And it's true, right? People don't understand. So can you explain that in quantitative?
So basically, if you think about nature depleted, it's hard to define, but if you use the definition of habitats that were from pre-human condition to now, wherever they change the most, it is just it's actually the UK and Ireland, but combined, these are some of the most depleted landscapes in the world, because most of it has been converted to agriculture, mostly grazing land. And so what would have been, which is a whole network of woodlands and glades and lots of wetlands and peatlands, are mostly gone. And that's what makes the UK.
So how can tourism help? Well, I mean, if you want to really be good, virtuous, and stay in the UK, you go somewhere like Knepp and you book your camping holiday and you go into their restaurant, which is a regenerative agriculture fed menu. There are lots of, there's so many places in the UK. I remember I went to my first trip, of course I'm deep in this in 2020, my first trip when lockdown lifts is to go to the Scottish Highlands. I book a villa there, or a cottage there, with my daughter and her family. It was amazing. And I go to the hairdresser when I get back to London. I go, oh, yes, we had our summer holiday. We went to the Scottish Highlands. He went, babe, that's not a holiday. Holiday, sitting around with a cocktail, feet in the sands, fit people in nice bikinis. I went, okay, you have got a point. But lots of midgies. So it's a balance. So it's working out what we want from our holiday. We can't always be wearing the hair shirts, but we can. I remember Mr. and Mrs. Smith 20 years ago, I was hopping on flights, go to Barcelona for the weekend. We do need to be switching that out. And as you said, it's that very small percentage of people in the world with that privilege. It's reducing the carbon from that. And carbon is the only metric we can easily sort of measure ourselves. And so,
yeah, but it's interesting because in the book, for example, I went to Fiji and looked at their ecotourism, or their tourism industry, which is one of the biggest industries in Fiji. It happens to be very far away from most places. And if you think about what else Fiji could do to protect those ecosystems, there's not a lot, there's not many options. In a funny way, actually, the UK has lots of options, has an incredible network of policy support, lots of businesses that could do more. Like, we could be putting a lot more pressure on that piece. In Fiji, it's actually very reasonable to say we don't have those choices. And you can do the carbon maths, and people have done it. The government actually has tried to make the case that the revenues that protect ecosystems that continue to store carbon more than outweigh the flights that come in. Again, there's assumptions that go in there. You don't have to take it at face value, but it's not always obvious that the only input to your calculation should be the emissions from the thing itself, because it also matters what you're funding.
Something interesting. I feel like was it one of those islands in French Polynesia that actually ran out of water? It was the first island in the world that run out of. Did you know that 2% of the world's water is fresh water? Only 2%, right? 20% of that's in Canada. I have a Canadian passport. So I know Trump wants Canada and USA to merge, but Canada holds on to that fresh water. But I'm thinking, in all seriousness, and you're mentioning Fiji, and people would be like, how could it possibly? I remember when I pitched a story to the Times travel editor a few years ago, it was really hard. When I started specializing on this was 10 years ago this year, I just realized 2015, yeah. And the travel editor at the Times then, she said, I'm not interested in this, Juliet, this sustainability stuff. No one is. I'm not, the readers aren't. And also, you can't be flying places. People have to separate these things. We have to support. We heard from Dee about Kalukanda. I'm always saying it wrong. You say it for me. Say Kalukanda House. right? You heard that story. I genuinely got shivers down my spine. Think of all those great businesses around the world that we could be supporting through our travels, particularly in destinations. We shouldn't call them destinations, we all know that, right? Because they're people's homes and countries. We should be calling them countries and nations. They're destinations to us. But if you think of Sri Lanka, how incredibly important it is to go there and spend money there. And something you were so, you're very humble, Dee. But also what Dee taught me through us doing a little bit of work together was, many of you who spend time in Asia will know about the stigma around people with disabilities, around orphan children, and you reminded me of that and how much you work with local communities. One of the hotel companies I recommend in here is Teardrop Hotels in Sri Lanka, and what they do to help people with disabilities. I've also visited a few of those myself. I mean, they're so marginalized, and they're so, shoved in the attic, as it were, as people. This is where tourism, we can support it, and something else really important about travel and people forget, and I had my real moment of realizing this was in Vietnam this summer, was with my Vietnamese tour guide. He was like, the power of the two-way exchanges when we travel with the local communities. So people in Vietnam smoke a lot, right? So did I until 2 months ago, anyway. And from having foreigners coming to their country and seeing that they smoke less and explaining why we smoke less, it's good for our health and all, they smoke less, and it's directly attributed to tourism. So it's not just about us going in and dropping in the money. It's this two-way exchange that we have to think about in the world. And I mean, that's what, it's so powerful. Someone said the same to me about Socotra when they went to the island of Yemen, which a few of us wanted to do together, but it's challenging. We wanted to do. Is they said that when they went to Socotra, the people there, Yemeni people, were like, wow, you guys are really nice and reasonable and kind of like us, because they just didn't realize, because it's not how outsiders are presented. So it's helpful for us to do these things.
Which does also highlight the importance of being aware when you're traveling of how you are perceived, how you behave. I mean, there's a great Instagram account. I used to live in Bali for 2 years. You know this. It's called Bali Idiots.
Oh, no.
Idiots
God,
in
it's brilliant, hilarious.
Yeah.
I lived in
You
Bali.
showed me this.
With my daughter. She went to the Green School for a while,
Yeah. What's it called? Idiots in Bali?
I think it's, I don't know.
Something along those lines. You'll find it very quickly, and it's incredibly funny. So there are only like 2 or 3 places in the world where mummies are found, right? So ancient Egypt, Sudan, and the main strip in Kuta after a night out with Aussies on mopeds covered in
wrapped
bandages.
in bandages, absolutely. Not
it's like it's along those lines. So I'm just saying, generally speaking, there's a whole range of, there are tourists who do that, and there are tourists who have the experiences you're describing. And I think it ultimately is like how we move through the world as people. Whether you're traveling or not traveling, it's kind of besides the point. But it is important to be incredibly aware of how you are coming across, knowing that you sit in a position of incredible privilege, you're making a choice to spend your money, and you're doing it somewhere else. So in that vein, Juliet, my question to you was, you've covered this industry for a very long time. But you've basically been here since the beginning of that kind of sustainable travel boom. You've helped make it happen in some ways. How is the definition of what good looks like, what sustainable looks like, how's that changed over the last 20 years?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'd like to say I have not, I can't credit. So if anyone knows Justin Francis, who was recently got, it was OBE, wasn't it, who was the founder of Responsible Travel. He's the OG. I'm not. I'm a fairly
follower at the very least.
Boutique travel, absolutely. Yeah. But so I would say I'm someone who's certainly raised awareness of that seeming contradiction of sustainable luxury being something that actually can have positive impact. So it's been wonderful to see in recent years, but I'm going to also say that I'm seeing it index down. So I'm seeing everyone suddenly cared about it. I think we all paused in 2020, and that was wonderful, but I'm definitely seeing it become less of a priority. And I'll be honest with you, the articles on sustainable travel traffic least. So please click on them, share them, remember that.
Why do you think that is?
Well, because people think they're going to have to compromise, or it's going to cost more, or it's like, ooh, I just want to have a nice holiday. But I know that my articles, probably sustainable travel, do the least well. It depends on the audience, right? Depends on the keywords and the SEO. But actually, I have to be really honest. So please do. Just remember, we all inform those algorithms, what you click on. Really think about that. So please, if you think something's important, click on it, share it, because it affects what the algorithms share.
And so when you think about why that might be the case, I'm really curious, because this is information, and we need to respond to it. So if what's happening is people are pulling back from, and that's frankly, Jay, you shouldn't feel too bad about travel. It's happening across every industry. Like, this is a challenging time for sustainability, full stop, in every industry. Why is that, and what can we do about it?
Well, I think we all know, same as, it kind of made us feel bad or guilty or worried. And a few years ago, I thought, how can we present climate solutions through travel in a way that people actually engage with it? And I loved coming up with a podcast series called Funny Old World. I'm looking at Simon London, who is one of the funniest people I know. He makes me laugh. Simon says, I brought the darkness. He brought the light humor. But I think people just were like, I just want to hear things that make me feel good and are easy to follow and make me feel like I'm going to have good times. And that isn't always the case. It certainly isn't with climate, is it? So I think I observed, I don't know if you saw Professor Mark Maslin. He teamed up with Joe Brand to try and bring some comedy to climate and translate everything into human. It was great, but it still didn't really work. Simon's funnier. But I think it's the content, isn't it? I think so I think what we have to do is talk about sustainability without talking about sustainability. So when I had this, I think a lot of us had a really tough year last year, contrary to how it looks on social media. I felt, I think 2025 is the year a lot of traditional media will become extinct, genuinely. So that's pretty hard when you've wanted to be a journalist since you were 7 years old. So now I'm thinking, I just thought when I start this year, what do I want to do? I want to help people understand how wonderful it is to support businesses grassroots businesses that support female leadership or that raise awareness around things that I care about. So by celebrating those and by getting people excited about great businesses and great initiatives, I think we all feel good. It's just not calling it sustainability.
You can call it whatever you want, as long as it's good. No, honestly, we're seeing this in other sectors as well. Like, you can rebrand climate action as resilience, right? We just need to keep doing things, and things are failing, and so we need to switch those things. Fine by me. But I think you're pointing at something quite important, which is the value of not taking yourself too seriously, inspiration, like the things that people actually travel for, rather than feeling like you're being told what to do and it'll be annoying and painful. The nice thing, then this is the most amazing thing about travel, is unlike other industries. So if you're going to buy green steel and it costs you a little bit more than regular steel, you don't know what steel went in that, and so none of you are going to know. And so the ultimate purchaser chooses entirely based on cost. So you can believe in some model of Homo economicus operating in the green steel purchasing industry. With travel, we do not make economic optimization decisions, right? You can, but then you would only book budget holidays, to exactly the sort of thing you described. But we make choices based on feeling and emotion and what we want to do and what the people around us want to do. And so when we don't have to operate in the world of it's cheaper.
And also, if you just look at any other sector like food, fashion, travel, we won't eat cheap food because we know it's bad for us.
Yeah.
And we won't buy cheap fashion because we know it's terrible situations. It's just, again, it's about down to telling better stories when it comes to travel and helping people understand that really great travel decisions and supporting good businesses feel better as a holiday. Yeah. And and all those reasons. Yeah, same, universal.
There's one, I'm going to end with one question, then open it up. And my question here was, and you mentioned this as well in your intro, I think it's hard to know who to trust. And this is ultimately for people who travel once, if you do one big trip a year, you're placing a lot of trust in the person or the source or the traditional media outlet that told you to go there, right? And so trust is an important commodity, and it's rare in this space. Getting rarer, if I hear you correctly. So, who do we trust?
Wow, yeah. So there's a crisis in trust. We know that certainly with the traditional media. I mean, when we created Mr. and Mrs. Smith, it was because there was a gap in the market between traditional black and white hotel guidebooks, dry, and beautiful coffee table books. And they wanted I think people really wanted something in the middle where it was people who had somewhere with good taste, which had recommended the great restaurant, the whole experience. And that obviously, Mr. and Mrs. Smith has transitioned from a traditional guidebook to an online travel agency owned by Hyatt. So I'm not saying that you can't trust them, but it's a very different business model. And so who do we trust? Then we had the bloggers, we could trust them, they were anonymous, they spoke the truth, but then they became influencers and content creators. There's no checks and balances there. They celebrate where whoever gives them a nice free holiday, and they cut and paste. I met a GM in Dubai who described the new era of journalism, he did actually say, as he was French, so he said they're just the les passe-plats, the people who stand by the pass in the restaurant. They take the plate and they pass it to the diners. The passe-plat with the press releases. So depressing. So who do we trust? I hope that, well, you can certainly trust traditional guidebooks. I mean, Schaff's, when I say he's a real author, that's what I'm talking about actually, is people who are really not in it for the money, for the salaries.
There's no money in publishing.
No money. Would they hate me if I told everyone how much I was paid for this? Fuck it, I don't care. I got paid £2,500, Sophie, I think. It took me 2 months to work on that. I'm sorry, that's me. That was my fee. I think it's important people understand that. And I don't make money from the sale of the book, but the publisher does, and we still want publishers to flourish. But it's really important you understand that this is so much work went into this from the publishers, in a way that stuff that people just share, all that noise online, it's just not the same. And AI and ChatGPT just regurgitating what's out there, it's really profoundly depressing. And there are a few of us, I hope, who share tips that, I stayed in a really beautiful hotel in Bali, and I still haven't put it on my Instagram because I just try and picture someone saving up, going to that £400 a night hotel, and I'm like, was it really that amazing? It's a lot of money, so I take a huge responsibility, and I'm not transactional, and if people ask me to put stuff on my Instagram, I'm like, I might not stay now. But of course I will celebrate it on Instagram if I think it's great. It's really, everything is so transactional and pay to play. So I don't know, I think we can still trust obviously the New York Times, definitely FT, The Economist, where you were. These are a few of the outlets. I mean, Condé Nast Traveller, of course, who, you heard from Dee how trusted and valuable that is. But when it comes to taste, I think ultimately, what the most important thing we know? Word of mouth, still, more than ever, each other. And that is all I ask, is everyone to tell better stories, get good recommendations, share with each other, explain why somewhere was good, ask more questions when you're there, when you're traveling, and share that with your friends. I think word of mouth, it may not, word of mouth is the most important still than ever. We're all, if we all have to think like journalists.
I think word of mouth is super important, because if I think about my most, the really special trips I've done, they've been fairly so over the summer last year, I went to Mongolia. A really good friend of mine organized a trip for us. First of all, I knew nothing about Mongolia. I didn't know where to stay, don't speak the language, really, without, not just word of mouth, but a kind of genuine person who lived there and who could show us around. No way we could have had that experience. It was absolutely magical. None of those places even had names. So you could not find it online, you couldn't do any of it. It doesn't have to be that extreme, I think.
But can I remind everyone that's why travel agents are so important? And in the UK, we've kind of forgotten that.
Yes,
I think
that's true. I haven't thought of it. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, well, there's a lot in the room, and I'm not just saying it, certainly, but I think people really forget that. In America, that they have their doctor on speed dial, they have their travel agent. But here, it's again going to that cost. Everyone wants to save money. Honestly, the value of the expertise of actual in-the-know travel agents, it's immeasurable when you're going through them. People just want to save that. It's again, like a book. I can't remember how much this is, but how much is it? It's 47 Canadian dollars. I don't know, £2.50. So thanks, Justin. So I think, investing in that and getting those tips, it's just thinking about investment, but we're always trying to do everything on the cheap. Yeah. We've got to get out of that mindset.
Especially when this is back to the point, we don't optimize for cost when we travel. We waste huge amounts of money when we travel on stuff that we regret. Who here hasn't regretted some decision they made in some travel of theirs? Of course. And so I think what you're saying is we're going to spend all this money anyway.
Yeah,
Might as well think about it.
Yeah, and also just travel, just really, really take time to think about where you're going. Really think about your itinerary. I know we all just want a holiday and you just book it. And the biggest thing I could say to anyone here is really think about who you're giving your money to. I know that the Conduit community knows that more than any, but so important now that we have more of these hotel developer-owned or created properties which perform as assets to make rich people richer in different countries, managed by companies with offshore accounts. I mean, really understand the economics of where you go and think about that money. To give you an example, I stood in a year ago, exactly, last January, I was keynote at a conference with American travel agents, and I came in at the end of their sales thing. They're all whooping, woo, we gave Four Seasons $2 million this year, well done, woo. I get on and I went, oh, hi everyone. How many people here know who owns Four Seasons? 2 hands went up. I'll ask you in here, who owns Four Seasons?
This is a highly educated
Who owns Four Seasons Hotel Group? Right? Okay? But we all know it, and we all go to. It's not Isadora Sharp, the Canadian. He owns still 5%, I think. It used to be a big chunk was owned by Prince Al Wahid. He sold it. Oh, it's Bill Gates. Bill Gates owns it. Cascade. Yeah. So whatever you feel. I'm just saying about economic leakage when you go. I love the Ubud Four Seasons there, owned by the who are the people who own Como? Who are the Ongs, right? Property, a beautiful property and everything in Four Seasons. It's amazing. But you're just mindful that you're in Indonesia, and you have to think about where that money's ultimately going.
Same with flying, by the way. So if you fly to a country with a national airline, airlines don't really make any money, but that's one of the biggest that's probably the most expensive thing you spend money on. And so you should really think about choosing, even if it's slightly less nice or whatever it might be. That's what the Fiji Tourism Board person told me this when I was researching the book. He said, Fiji Airways is our biggest export revenue.
How'd you manage that with South Africa?
Good question. Good point.
They went out of business.
Virgin Atlantic, very nice.
But and also the journey, in theory, the journey starts from the minute you get on the plane if you're experiencing that. So I will tell a very politically incorrect story. You're all wincing already now, aren't you? But I once went on South China Airlines, sat next to a nice Australian guy, and we went to take off and everything, and the plane was, and he said to the flight attendant, when are you going to do the security announcement? I won't do it because I can't do the Chinese accent, but she just said, plane goes down, we all die. She's right. So anyway, one of my favorite travel memories.
On that note, Juliet, any more stories like that? No, any other questions? Ideally,
am I cancelled yet? Am I cancelled online?
No, you're uncancelable.
Oh, am I?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I grant you that privilege. Today, for one evening only. Questions, please.
Hello. So sustainable travel is often the same as luxury travel, and people can't always afford that. How can you travel sustainably if you don't want to stay in a youth hostel, for instance, and when you're on a budget?
You can answer.
I can answer that from personal experience. Like most of my life, I've been on a pretty tight budget, and some of the most sustainable. So again, I can't keep bringing up the Fiji thing, but okay, Mozambique. I was just in Mozambique, and I was diving with whale sharks. They migrate along the eastern coast of Africa, December and January. I stayed in a dive shop. It wasn't luxury travel by any means. Incredibly well-run dive shop with a training program for Mozambican individuals who are there and who train and then go and dive elsewhere. All of the money that they make, and they don't make a ton of money, stays in that community because it's in Tofu, a tiny town. Was it luxurious? No, I thought it was lovely. You have these kind of lovely cabins by the beach, and they're very professional diving. The diving was more expensive than the accommodation, to be honest. But no one would look at that and say luxury travel.
And can I also, because you just went to Mozambique. Mozambique is one of the most, a perfect example of one of the countries in the world that needs us most. It was the poorest country in the world at one point, I think, was certainly one of them. And obviously what's going on there in northern Mozambique, I know someone who's had a honeymoon there, and that hotel is now Al-Qaeda pirates. It doesn't exist anymore. So you can imagine that puts people off traveling, but we all need to do our geography homework. and work out there are parts of the country that are perfectly safe. Cicero, which is in here in the south, is the most beautiful hotel, and they really honor the local culture. I read your chapter for your new book, and I loved how you said it was in the iron grip of the crown of the Portuguese. Yeah, it was beautiful. For 300 years, but really helping these countries find their new Mozambique culture and supporting Mozambican culture, supporting businesses that really restore a new dignity to their. I mean, it's really, really important.
But let me tell you, the TOEFL in December was at roughly 10% occupancy. Because people had seen the headlines around election violence.
That's it.
And yes, at some point people have personal risk thresholds, but for a lot of that period, November and December, it was completely safe and 10% occupancy. So people look at a headline and say, I'm cancelling.
Of course.
Everyone there was...
Ecuador, when I was there earlier this year, and last year, I was in Quito, and I was in the airport, and my friend from Sky News, Sarah, texted me and went, oh, we've got our camera crews there just now. I was like, yeah, you're literally ruining their tourism industry because you're showing people with AK-47s, which is in a very small, isolated, you've got to tell the other side of the story. Of course we cover that because that's news. But the problem is that all of the other tourism businesses suffer from the rest of the country. And so I really worked hard, and Condé Nast sat on my column for 3 months, there's an image, sat for 3 months before they published it. And it was just, they were crying out saying, please, please. And so again, wildfires in one island in Greece, everyone cancels. So again, it's that remembering that sustainable travel is really about economic sport. But going back to the tension between affordable and expensive, I think Booking.com did a survey where as many people thought sustainable means cheap ecotourism as means expensive, unaffordable luxury tourism. So certainly this book, and certainly what I try and do, is celebrate very small, affordable, accessible businesses. I mean, the perfect example for me of a sustainable tourism initiative would be Panauti in Nepal, which was created in 2018. They started doing their community homestay. I think it was then. So you had the earthquake. When was that? 7 years ago? So we had that, which decimated tourism. So they really needed us to support them as they came back. But what still happened was everyone went to Kathmandu. They still were too many people going to the capital that's famous, going to the foothills of Everest. Yeah, and so what they did was in this village, which is UNESCO protected for its ruins, but it didn't have any accommodation. What a charity called Planetera, who works with G Adventures, it's their foundation, they went in there, went into the homes, invited the women, the housewives, to open up their homes, open up the bedrooms to host guests, and it brought in money to their households. And also, it was amazing. I was walking down the street with these women, right, walking along really proud, lots of men sitting at the side, a bit sort of sheepish, and we said, we noticed this. She said, yes. When they first came here to create this initiative, the men laughed at us, said, who are you to learn English? Who are you to start hosting travelers? What can you do to the women? Now we speak English and we bring in the money, and that money helps their children get further education. So that is an incredible example of totally entry-level, affordable, incredible sustainable tourism.
More questions over there.
We've got one back here.
And then maybe in the blue next. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Carol. I think a lot of the people in the room you're preaching to the converted. Most people here have come here because they all support sustainable travel and they appreciate it. The job is getting to those other people. And so my question is, how can you turn your storytelling where we're not preaching to people about sustainable travel? What's the best way of sharing how amazing these experiences are without guilt-tripping people into traveling sustainably?
Thank you. Well,
can I just follow what she's saying?
yes.
I'm a charity worker and I work in Asia. Most of our audience don't really understand, not like people in this room, like preaching the choir. So what is the hook? Sometimes we're facing an enormous challenge is people don't have time. From 2 minutes, now we have to do 20 seconds because people lose attention thanks to TikTok. So how do we convert this lovely story when you have 20 seconds?
Short form scrolling, yeah, it's only going to get more, go in that direction. I asked a friend of mine. No, sure, we can do it. Well, first of all, you want to pull people in to your messaging rather than just push out your marketing. I always am a big advocate of tell, don't sell. There's so much noise in marketing out there. People really do engage with, I think, human stories. I'm going to quote Leo Tolstoy, who say, to feel pain is to be human, to feel somebody else's, to feel pain is to be alive, to feel another person's pain is to be human. I think it's just bringing in those really powerful stories. Josh Porter, if anyone knows, Tuck South Boys on TikTok. I don't go on TikTok, but they do a great job of telling stories in that short form style. TikTok. What did I call them? Tuck South on TikTok. Sorry, Grandma. Anyway, my mum used to call Garfield Garfunkel all the time. It's so embarrassing. The orange cat, Garfunkel. So, there are ways of doing it. It's just really human stories that pull you in. As a charity, well, first of all, I'd say you need to have the aesthetically pleasing vernacular. I'm going to start a big project this year. I'm moving a lot of my energy from traditional media and journalism to working to tell better stories, certainly with NGOs, and elevating their visuals, because often I think charities, people are so busy doing the grassroots work, they don't do slick enough storytelling on socials. So you got to speak in that. You got to meet people where they're at and what they're expecting. So you got to do it better. You got to be as good as a content creator, but just tell really great stories.
I completely couldn't agree more. I think there may be one is that preaching to the converted is actually really helpful in some cases, because I learned at least 5 things from you, Juliet, in this specific talk. I'm sure people in this audience learned things, and so in some ways, even if you know this is an important thing, you can still learn loads by hanging out with people who also think about this. So that's valuable.
Exponentiality. I mean, if you can exponentiate, right? Like you're all converted, but particularly that UK nature depletion, we've had a conversation and developing it and advancing. It's really important.
And so my only point was, I think preaching may be the wrong framing, right? Like, how do the converted preach to the next? I don't know, and frankly, I have no idea. But then there's a much broader conversation about that. We may not be the best messengers. We should accept that, right? And so what you're saying is, there's people who can tell really good stories, and you need to allow them, give them the tools to tell those stories, and that's kind of it.
So I always just think about, imagine how the people on the receiving end feel with your stories. That was kind of my point with the feeling. How do you make people feel? So I saw my daughter's, whatever he is, uncle, say something on the other side of the family anyway, something on LinkedIn that, I'll be honest, really, it kind of offended me. It was just like, it was basically the anti-wokeism thing. I had to sit on my hands, and I've been sitting with it for 2 weeks. How do I respond, or what do I do? And I think the only way you can respond to something like that is say, I know, on those all that wokery, and they're trying to get like marginalized people heard. You find it, do it in a way that's fun, or making fun, going along with them, telling a joke that makes them smile, so that you're not being superior. I think that's really what's key, is just trying to say things in a way that makes people smile, or you're on the same side, or you're not putting them down. I mean, I can't think of a perfect example, but I will say J.K. Rowling is the queen of it on Twitter. Wherever you sit with what she's talking about, just sometimes, funny things like just being funny and fun. And
just be funny, that's the advice.
It's hard when it comes to, like, one of the things I want people to know more about is the intersection between trafficking in every form and tourism. It's not talked about because it's dark and uncomfortable. That's a challenging one to make fun, but make people feel. So Halimo, who we work with, so Janie here from Sama Sama and Unseen Tours. Halimo, I met, I'll start crying, sorry. When I first met her, and she told me her story, and I've introduced her to other people. I'm not sure I could communicate it through social media, but in real life, when you go on a walking tour with her, and she tells you in a very gentle way that she was trafficked age 7 from Nigeria to Italy, in the worst sense that I mean that. And she now lives in Canning Town and has beautiful boys and is a baker. It's finding those opportunities in tourism to have those stories told. So in charity, I mean, you know, that's a hard one to communicate through social media, short form scrolling. But it certainly is giving a platform to those voices.
How much time do we have?
We've got time for one more question.
One more.
Or we can do
No.
2. Perfect.
Let's take both together, yeah.
I think it was pointing to me, that's why. Thank you very much. It was very enlightening and entertaining conversation. I wanted to ask you about, so I was reading this week in one of the trade press, the last page was a column from James Thornton of Intrepid Travel, and I know his comments were about a report called Me First in 25. So the fact that apparently 25, it's a very selfish year, which obviously certain political situation having augmented considerably. And so where does sustainability, regeneration, and all the things that we are talking about? Because I'm worried. I think there is a lot of selfishness in the world, and I'm not sure that, you know, sustainability is going to be in everyone top of mind.
What was the unselfish year? I want to know. Asking for a friend. What was the unselfish year?
What's the answer?
When was the unselfish year? When was that?
Oh, well, yeah, no, sure. But at least people pretended to care.
2020.
But, okay, so I disagree. And the reason I disagree is I think in hindsight, we got swept away, completely carried away with the narrative that the earth is healing and people are fundamentally going to change their behaviors. And I think the reality directly contradicts what we all believed, that this was a collective moment of coming together. If anything, and actually there's a bunch of research on this, if anything, what happened during the pandemic has sown the seeds for exactly what we're seeing in 2025, right? Like incredible amounts of loneliness and mental health challenges, marginalization from groups that have already been marginalized, conversation increasingly moving online into echo chambers, like all of this stuff happened in 2020. So I don't know if that was a good year in hindsight. It felt like a nice year. Not a nice year, but...
It's interesting. I mean, thank you for mentioning that. I didn't know that. And it's sort of articulating what I'm feeling, I guess. And let's swivel it round. And instead of, yes, you know, me first, let's always keep reminding ourselves that I can make a difference. And we have to offset that. And the question about sustainable travel, sorry, I should have really said also businesses such as Intrepid, which organize these small group tours, which I would have in the past said, no way, no thanks. But actually, I've been on one. And more of these community-type-based ways of traveling. You've also got Flashpack. You've got, you know, lots of these small groups are fantastic. But I think what we all know about travel is that it cultivates empathy, which is the antidote to constant, I don't know, entitlement.
Totally, yeah, and self-interest and
self-interest.
Yeah. And there's another, you just made me think about something that's super interesting. We always have these conversations that just kind of spiral. If you think about your role as a traveler, I mean, we do things because of culture and feeling and how we make other people feel and how they make us feel, the stories we can tell, all of that stuff, right? So inherent to all of this is some degree of, you know, something that isn't entirely directed at self. Because even if you're traveling with self-interest, you do want to tell people about that. There's always going to be a core of community feeling when you go do something out in the world. And so we can't be entirely selfish. And so you're right, like maybe we can think about what we're doing as individuals and what we'll tell, what stories we'll tell when we get back.
The biggest influence on behavioral change, particularly around climate, is I can gamify this and do it as a quiz, but usually is it financial incentive? Is it, you know, legislation? Is it companies telling you what they do? No, it's peer-to-peer. Yeah. It's us. So virtue signal away, tell better stories, talk about positive impact-led experiences you have all the time, and that influences people, and that tackles the me first, I think. And just talk more about how stuff and it doesn't enrich us or bring us joy, but time with people we love or traveling or seeing the world does. I mean, just talk about it.
Yeah, one more question, right, to wrap up?
No?
Yeah, go.
You were talking about the two-way relationship and how that's the most important part in kind of fostering a real connection. What kind of questions do you think it's worth asking people where you're visiting to kind of foster that even more as someone who struggles to ask the right questions maybe at times?
It's a great question. What would you...
Quick answer, it's the questions you actually have. I mean, when I do interviews, I always say, like, the questions you actually have, even if they're silly questions or questions you feel embarrassed about, they're real questions. Everything else is, I think it's ultimately somewhat patronizing to, you know, when you ask questions that you think you're supposed to ask, but actually, I'm sure you have questions when you're in these places.
So true. Thinking like a... So a perfect example, I was queuing for the House of Terror Museum in Budapest last week, really cold, and I saw this Korean coffee shop across the road, and I thought, oh, I'll just go in there and get a little moment where it feels a bit warmer. I went in, Korean guy, very handsome, and that's it. But because I'm a journalist, I'm not shy. I will go, well, I didn't go straight away, go, hey, you're handsome. But I did tell him at the end. And I said, so how come a guy, why a Korean coffee shop here in Budapest? How did that happen? And do you know, we went deep. I said, we had a whole conversation about the comfort women in Korea, because I said there's a museum which honors them, and he said they call them comfort women, it's such a euphemism. And then we talked about the grief from the museum across the road, and then we talked about how he worked for Land Rover in the UK previously, he'd gone to Warwick University, and how he found the UK a little bit hostile and racist towards him as Korean. That was just, don't shoot the messenger. I never did find out why the hell he moved to Budapest. But anyway, ask the questions, connect with people, have deeper stories, go deep, politely and sensitively.
Love it. Juliet, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We've learned so much in this conversation. I'm sure lots of people have.
Thank
Can we
you.
give Juliet a big round of applause, please?
And Sid. And Sid, thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right.
Thank you for having us. Thank you to the Conduit. Thank you.
All right, encourage everybody to pick up a book at the back, some refreshments at our bar, and have a good night.
Juliet's signing copies of her book at the table.